Hi, my name's Luke Eastwood. I'm an author for, uh, amongst others, Moon Books, and in fact, Moon Books published my first uh, first book on spirituality for the Druid's Primer, which is this book here. So, and they also published a little book called The Journey, which is this one. And I have another book coming out with them after quite a gap. I don't write hundreds of books. Um, just do them when I feel like it, I suppose. When I have something I think is worth writing about. So I have a new book which is a follow-up to the Druid's Primer called The Druid Garden, which will be out in the beginning of next year, 2021. So anyway, before I go into a talk, I just want to thank Trevor and Moon Books for inviting me to give this talk. So thank you very much for that. And I'm going to have a little sip of water. It's actually really hot here. I'm in Dingle, which is probably the wettest place in the whole of Ireland. And it's 7 o'clock and it's 19 degrees and the sun is still blazing and not a cloud in the sky. Amazing, absolutely amazing. I've got the window just to the right of me over there. So I'm in a t-shirt and shorts. It's boiling hot and very nice indeed. A good place to be in the world at the moment. We don't have any serious problems. No floods, no hurricanes, no locusts, no riots, no anything really. So I'm very grateful to be here and living in a very peaceful and relatively quiet part of the world. So, what am I going to talk about? You're probably wondering. So, yes, for those of you who don't know, I am, amongst other things, a druid, and that is my, I suppose, my specialist area in spirituality. And obviously I'll be talking about that, but I'll also be talking about the environment as well, because one of my major interests is environmentalism. I got involved in that when I was a student. Yeah, I would have been about 19 or 20, and I was living in North London, where I was studying at university, and I actually ended up living about 2 or 3 minutes away from the Greenpeace headquarters, which was in Islington. That's back when Islington was not a posh place. It was still full of cockneys back then. Now it's changed a lot. But anyway, that's where their offices were. And a friend of mine was involved in doing something and said, "Oh, do you fancy volunteering?" And I'd done some conservation work at college before and things. So yeah, brilliant. I'd seen them on the telly. So I got involved. And ever since then, I've been involved in various things for the years. Like Shelter Seed and the Global campaign and various other things. Here, the campaign against the Corrib gas field off of Westport, up in the northwest. And more recently, I've got involved in Extinction Rebellion. I'm the coordinator for County Kerry. So, so two major interests that really overlap: Druidism on one hand, and on the other, the environment. And I think they mesh together very, very nicely. And a lot of what I'm going to talk about is Celtic cosmology, or like the Celtic view of the universe, and how that ties in with actually living within paganism or in Druidry, and how it ties in with the environment as well, which is obviously a big topic at the moment, has been for quite some time, especially since Greta Thunberg became quite famous. There's a lot more coverage about the climate emergency, etc., etc. So, here we go. Enough preliminaries. I was thinking about what am I going to write, or rather, what am I going to say? So I thought I'd write some notes for myself. And as I began, I thought of something which may sound a little bit bizarre. There's a quote which seemed to fit nicely as a starting point, which was from the Buddha, the Dharma Siddhartha, which is, "With our thoughts we make the world." Strangely, I remember hearing this on a TV program back in the 1970s when I was a kid, called Monkey, which is a Japanese program. And the introduction to that, this quote was often said. And that stuck with me. And although obviously that's just a silly program, if you remember that at all, it was quite ridiculous. But I found it very enjoyable. But that introduced me to the idea of who the Buddha was and some of the concepts of Buddhism. So yes, the idea being, with our thoughts we make the world. We create our own reality with what we think and how we manifest our thoughts in reality in the world. So I would say, I agree with that, that all actions start with thoughts and ideas. They come from that. So what you're thinking is crucial in how you live your life and what is going to happen in your life. So going back to the environment, I'd say we all know that the environment is knackered, for want of a better word. It's in a bit of a state. You could say at this point that that's a given, that we don't have to argue about that. Is the world in a bad way, or is it not? Is it everything great? Is there a climate problem? Is there an environmental problem? I don't think anyone, apart from someone living under a rock, could say, oh yeah, it's all great. It's not. That's absolutely given. We can forget about that subject of whether or not there's a problem. So I think what's important now, and from conversations with younger people, the question is, what do we do? What do we do to change that? We've gone way past, oh God, there's a problem. It's now, what are we going to do about fixing this problem? So, when your house is on fire, telling people the house is on fire doesn't really achieve anything. The house is still on fire. You're talking about it isn't actually going to change anything at all. So really what you need to do is put the fire out, either yourself, or you need to ring somebody like the fire brigade who'll come and put the fire out. So we're at the stage where the house is on fire. We all know the house is on fire, but we haven't actually managed to put the fire out at all. You could say, in fact, that the house is getting worse. It's just burning away merrily, and we're just sitting there mostly talking about the fact that the house is on fire. And there are people who are trying, making an effort, but in order for us to make a real difference, I would say it's going to need an awful lot more people to go and get the buckets of water and start slinging them on the house to put the fire out. Hope you like that metaphor. It's one I've seen used a lot recently in different senses, and I think that fits very well with the whole idea about the environment being in chaos and in a major threat. So it needs action. We obviously need action at this stage. So where do these actions come from? So I've thought about this quite a bit. So I would say, first of all, an inner connection with nature, your attitudes and your intentions. Going back to what I was saying about thoughts, how you feel about life, how you should live it, your intentions of what you wish to do with your life, and how you're going to do that. Okay, and when these intentions you have become sufficiently strong, I would say that they then become concrete ideas, rather than just a nebulous sort of thought, oh, I wouldn't mind doing this. Once you develop the real desire to do something, an intention that's strong, that becomes a concrete idea, right, I'm actually going to do something. And at that point, the idea then moves into manifestation. So ideas can just remain ideas. Oh, I'm going to become a brilliant guitar player, for instance. May have started out as, oh, I'm really interested in music, I'd like to do some music. So that becomes a concrete idea. I'm going to learn the guitar and become brilliant. But that idea doesn't actually go anywhere until you pick up a guitar and start playing it and become good at it. So, all ideas have to manifest as real world actions. So you're thinking, where's all the Celtic spirituality? Well, we're coming to that, don't worry. Okay, I'd say, important ideas in your life manifest as real world actions. If it's really important to you, you will try and make it happen. Like, for instance, we've all got family, we've got friends. We might have a very large circle or a small circle, but the people that you really want to see, you will make the effort to get in touch with them. If you really want to see them or know how they're doing, you'll make that effort to get in touch. And the same thing applies to whatever you're interested, whatever ideas that interest you, that are important, you're going to make that effort to make it happen if it's really important to you. So the first thing I talked about there was the inner connection with nature. So connecting with nature, that's quite an obvious thing to some people, but not to everybody. How do you go about doing that? Okay, obviously there's meditation, there's prayer, there's doing spiritual journeys along shamanic lines, and there's also the practical side of it too. So looking at cosmic pictures of the world, the Celtic cosmology, or the universal picture, is quite unique, really. That's what we have in modern Druidism, and it does have in common some things, like the four elements would be what we call the Neoplatonic elements, would be common in modern Druidry. There's differing opinions about whether the four elements existed always in Druidism or Druidry, or whether it was adopted at a later time. One thing is for sure, that in Ireland especially, you've got a different model as well, and at least part of that model is also common to Wales. That would be what we call the three realms. So you've got your traditional four elements: earth, air, fire and water, which you're all familiar with, and the fifth one you might call like the sacred center or spirit. In the Irish and Welsh model, you've got three realms, which are sea, land and sky. In addition to this, you've got in Irish tradition 9 elements, which correspond with these three realms, and they also correspond with the body and the cosmos itself. So you've got a sort of dual set of correspondences. On one side you've got the human body, different parts, and on the other side you'd say you've got the physical world. Okay, so the way this works is quite unique. You've got three realms, which in the Welsh tradition are shown slightly differently. You've got a cauldron, and you've got these three different worlds that expand out. In the Irish tradition, you could say that they are overlapping in place. Like, obviously the land is the physical realm in which we live on, the sky is above us, and the sea is all around us. And these correspond with these three cauldrons, which are somewhat similar to chakras. So you've got three centers. You've got what's called the Cauldron of Warming, which is in the sort of bottom of the belly, just above the groin, which is the word for cauldron is coira in Irish. Coira got the goireth, which is your center at the bottom. And this corresponds with the blood, the mind, and the breath in the human being. And in the cosmos, that corresponds with the sea, the realm of the sea, the moon, and the wind. Okay, above that, you have so roughly what you might call the heart center in Vedic tradition, where the heart chakra is. You've got the cauldron of vocation, or Koira Urna. Okay, and this corresponds with the flesh, the hair, and the bones. So that's the three parts of the human, and also that corresponds with the realm of the land, plants, and stone. Okay, so that's the bottom two, and the top one is in the head, I suppose, corresponding with the crown and the third eye in the chakras. So that represents in the human being the head, the face, and the brain. So you see there's three groups of three. You've got three cauldrons, and each part subdivides into three. That is called the Cauldron of Knowledge, and the Irish is Coira South. And well, the Celts did believe that the head contained the soul. So the cult of the head, the chopping off the head, and keeping it as a rather gruesome trophy. So anyway, that also corresponds cosmically with the realm of the sky, the sun, and clouds. So you've got three cauldrons, each divided into three parts of a human being and three parts of the cosmos. So you've got a system that's very, very much grounded in the natural world. So I would encourage people to connect with this. This is a very, very ancient system. This was written down in the early Middle Ages, but it would appear to be going back thousands of years. Nobody actually knows how old this tradition is. And I very much like the correspondence between the body and the cosmos. That it immediately ties you together. It makes you feel that you're part of something bigger. You're part of the cosmos. And these three realms and these three cauldrons are a means of connecting yourself with nature, with the much greater realm of the entire cosmos. So I see that as a very beneficial way of making connection with nature, which of course is helpful if you want to change your behavior, you want to change your attitudes, your ideas about how you live in this world in a more positive and harmonious way. That's a good point to start from, connecting with nature using this model. Now, I personally think this fits very well with the Neoplatonic elements. I would regard this as sort of a three-dimensional model, if you like a sphere containing, the land, the sea, the sky. The sea connecting with the other world. The land is this physical world we live in, and the sky is the upper world of the gods and those you might call them heavenly beings, or some people refer to them as angels. And these are all interconnected. And in Irish tradition, there is the Bíle Bua, which is the equivalent of the Axis Mundi or the World Tree or Yggdrasil. And you'll find that model of the tree all over the world. And these three realms are connected through the tree, through the roots, the trunk, and obviously through the branches. So it's another very natural metaphor, very powerful. And, you know, you can travel through this tree, through journeying, through meditation, which can be a very powerful experience. So I would regard the four elements sort of like a plate, a dinner plate. Imagine you've got the you know, across of the four directions, you've got the center. And then if you kind of imagine a sphere around that, that represents the three realms. And the physical realm of the land would be like the middle bit. You've got the sky above you, the sea beneath. And it's sort of, I would visualize it as a sphere. And I'd say they works together. In the Celtic tradition, you've got 9 directions, which would basically include all the directions that would make up a sphere: in front of you, behind you, to the left of you, to the right of you, above you, beneath you. There's through and there's in and there's the center. So if you overlay these two models together, the 4, or call it 5 elements makes like a 2-dimensional model, and you overlay the 3 realms model, and that makes like a spherical 3-dimensional model. So I would say they can be used together harmoniously. Not everyone would agree with me. Some people would say they're mutually exclusive. I'm not going to get into that. That's a whole massive long discussion, and I'm just not going to go there. Personally, I think you can integrate both models quite nicely. So we've got a spiritual model we can connect with via elements, either using the 4 and 5 elements, or using the 9 and the 3 realms, or a combination of both. And then moving on from that, other ways of connecting with nature, I'd say. One I think is very powerful, maybe underrated, is walking. Just walking out in nature. I've noticed going walking, or even on a bicycle, you really take things in differently. When you're sat in a car or on a train, you're hurtling along at great speed, and you miss lots and lots of things. You've got a different perspective, and you can take in quite a lot in a wide sort of panorama, I suppose would be the word. But you're walking on a road, you can notice all the little details. You can stop and smell the flowers, so to speak. That really is, for me, a very powerful way of connecting to nature, just getting out into it. And just being, just going and maybe sitting down by a river and listening to it, or looking at, you know, butterflies flying about from one flower to another. Whatever, just being sat in the rain even, and not really doing anything, just existing. I suppose that's very much something you might find common with Taoism and Buddhism, this idea of just existing, going with the flow, being in the moment, following the flow of chi, which actually in Irish that would be called Nart, and the Welsh word I think is Nifri. I hope I said that right. So strangely, there's a lot of actual similar concepts between Taoism from China and Druidism. This idea of the flow of energy through life seems to be a common theme to both, which I think is very powerful. And sometimes just sitting and experiencing that in a very quiet way can be a very powerful experience, I think. Another thing that I find personally very powerful is gardening. I'm actually trained as a horticulturist. It's quite funny because as a kid I used to get really annoyed about having to help in the garden, having to shell peas or help you know, dig up carrots or whatever it was. I was more interested in going off and playing with my friends. I had a little plot that my parents gave me, and I sadly neglected it. And well, I think it was the year of 1977. It was a very hot summer, and I went off and played with my friends. Forgot to water my plants, and most of them died, to my parents' despair. When later on in life, I rediscovered gardening. When I was working in London, I had quite a stressful job. I lived in a Georgian house with a big walled garden, which was kind of abandoned. And I just thought, yeah, it might be interesting to have a go and pot around in the garden. And I'd come home from work, and I'd just forget about the whole day. I'd forget about the work I'd been doing and whatever might have stressed me. And I'd just get totally absorbed in what I was doing, and planting things and doing a bit of weeding, tidying up, going, having a look at the plants, watering them, etc. And apart from being quite therapeutic for me, I found it actually a good way of relaxing, of actually connecting with the natural world. Maybe I didn't always see it in a deeper sense. I just thought, oh, that was fun. My stress has disappeared. I feel a lot better. But from a perspective now of someone who's studied Druidry for quite a long time, I see that in a different way. And it's almost like meditation without actually doing the meditation, if you know what I mean. You just get absorbed in what you're doing, and you just become one with the task of gardening. You become connected with the natural world around you, the plants. If you learn to tune in with them, I think you can communicate with plants. You can learn to see what their needs are, and then do something. Obviously, to help. I suppose that's what gardening is. Gardening is actually partly doing what you want to make your garden look nicer, better, to produce food, whatever. But it's also assisting the plant realm. Pardon me. A more, I suppose, more benign version of that, maybe becoming more relevant now, is things like rewilding and guerrilla gardening. As the environmental awareness has become bigger, the kind of concept of gardening has changed. So this formal gardening, where you're out cutting the lawn constantly, clipping the hedge within an inch of its life, and exterminating every weed, that's changing. And it's about time it did change. So actually, through a more authentic approach to gardening, rewilding, maybe going and, say, doing the guerrilla gardening is, for instance, going and find some wasteland and putting a bunch of trees there. And nobody really cares about that land or is going to bother, so you'll end up with lots of trees if no one comes and chops them down. There's lots of opportunities for that kind of thing, and that really is an important way of connecting in a practical sense with the natural world, I think. So that's very practical. But moving backwards a little bit, back to the stage of ideas and attitudes, and you have a look at where we are now and how things are changing. Our attitudes towards animals, towards plants, towards our food, that has really begun to change. I remember my mother became a vegetarian in about, was it 1981 maybe? And she had great difficulty getting anything to eat if we ever went out anywhere. And people, you'd say, oh, I'm vegetarian, and the waiter's jaw would drop and they'd go into a panic, almost have an aneurysm. These days, that's not a big deal anymore. But things are changing. Vegetarianism, veganism, even people who are omnivores are beginning to realize that a change of attitude is necessary, that we don't need to eat 5 tons of meat a week, that maybe once or twice a week is probably enough. and a different attitude to how we treat animals. And also, maybe it's beginning to change about our attitudes towards how we treat plants, because recent science has shown that actually plants are sort of sentient to some extent. They do interact with the world, they can sense things, and they can interact with each other and even with us. Maybe this is leading to a more holistic view about how we treat the animal world and the plant world. I certainly hope so. Certainly my own view has moved more and more that way. Um, and that's very much guided by my spirituality, by my Druid beliefs, and my view that we are a part of this huge cosmic model, which I discussed earlier, the three realms, the 9 elements, and the 4 or 5 element model, that we are just part of that. We are not above that or separate from it. We are part of it. We are inside it. And if we mistreat ourselves, we mistreat the world around us, then we're mistreating the whole of creation, really. That's how I would see things. And I would be very much of the animist point of view, that deity or God or the gods or spirit, whatever you want to call it, it is what animates all life, what is the creation, the power of Chi or Nat or Nifri is flowing through every living thing that exists in the entire universe, not just on this planet, but any other planets that might have life, which we don't know about at the moment, but who knows, we may find out there are other life forms elsewhere, not just on this planet. Although actually, having said that, they've already shown there was bacteria on Mars. That's proven already. So we know that in our own solar system there was some life on Mars once. So that gives us hope that the universe might have a lot more life in it than we've previously thought. Obviously, all the old religions, Druidry being no exception, they had no idea of the fact there might be alien life. This was the center of our world and of the universe as far as humanity is concerned. And a lot of religions still have that that view. So I mean that's very much tied up with the idea of anthropomorphism, which is a bit of a nasty long word, but it basically really just means making everything human. So we often do that. You see cartoons of animals and they're given a kind of human form. We tend to anthropomorphize virtually everything. We look at the world through human eyes, and we give human qualities to other things that don't have human qualities at all. And I think that's probably because we've decided that we are the most important creatures in the universe, on this planet, and so everything is remodeled from a human perspective. I've come to think that that is completely wrong. That picture of the world is utterly incorrect. We may be the most intelligent creatures on this planet, but I don't think that makes us any more important, any more worthwhile, or gives us any more right to live than, say, an earwig or any kind of creature. So I wouldn't be into anthropomorphism as a way of looking at the world. Obviously, I understand that for convenience and to make it easy to understand, we tend to give a human face to God or our gods. I would see that as just as a metaphor, or a sort of convenient sort of screen, if you like. So behind this image of a humanoid god or gods is the reality, which is infinite, which is beyond description, beyond comprehension. And we just humanize stuff to make it easier for ourselves. obviously in some religions people actually think that God is a grey-haired old man with a big beard sitting up on a cloud, whereas that's just a very over simplistic anthropomorphization of what deity probably really is. We really don't know, and I suppose the only way that you'll ever know 100% is to shuffle off this mortal coil and go on into the next life. I mean, a lot of people have experienced contact with deity, including myself, but I wonder, is my view of that through my human filters, my limited comprehension of what deity is, what God or the gods are. So, I would tend to, I think, automatically anthropomorphize that experience because I am human. And but my awareness has changed over the years, in that I do think the world needs to be looked at more holistically. I believe it's an animistic universe, and I'm trying to move away from a human-centered view of reality and of life and where I fit into the world. That I realize that I am not the most important thing in this world, and that humanity itself is not the most important thing in the universe. I think the more people come to that conclusion, the more chance we have of integrating into the world, of having a better quality of life by actually valuing the rest of the world outside of humanity and learning to harmonize with it rather than just, seeing ourselves as separate, which I think has been an enormous problem over centuries, if not thousands of years. And I'd say there's a big divide between the intellectual and sensual experience of life. And you could call that the divide between spirit and matter, possibly. I mean, loads of philosophers have written about this subject. And I'm actually going to read you a little bit of a book. It's not my own book. This is a book by Hermann Hesse called Narcissus and Goldman, which is a wonderful book. I love Hermann Hesse. He's one of my favorite authors. But this kind of sums it up really well, I think. So this is an extract. This is a guy called Narcissus, who's been friends with a fellow called Goldman, who was a bit younger than him. They're both kind of young when they met. He's a very young man, and Narcissus was still a boy. Goldman was still a boy. And at this point, they're both grown up. And Narcissus has become an abbot. He's obviously Christian, but what this man has to say may possibly be viewed as heresy by some Christians. It's very much of a sort of more Gnostic sense of mind. And he's talking to Goldman about life and the view of the world. And they've lived very different worlds. He's been living in an ivory tower, pretty much. He's an intellectual. And Goldman has gone off into the world, and he's very much a sensualist. He's had a mixture of very exotic, wonderful, and quite horrific, terrible physical and sensual experiences, varying emotions from that, whereas his friend lives in a very unemotional world. Okay, here we go. Till now, it never seemed to me that their art, in comparison with my thought and science, was a thing to be taken very seriously. I would think more or less in this way. Since man, after all, is a dubious alloy of matter and spirit, and since his spirit can bring him to the knowledge of eternity, whereas matter can only draw him down into death and fetter his soul to all that perishes, he should strive away from the senses to the spirit, and so exalt his life and give it meaning. Only now do I begin to perceive how many paths lead us to knowledge, that study is not our only way to it, and perhaps not the best to follow. Certainly it is mine, and I must keep to it. But I see you by the opposite way, the way which leads through the senses, reach as deep a knowledge as any that most thinkers achieve, of the essence and secret of our being, and a far more living mode of setting it forth. So basically, after all these years of being an intellectual, he's actually realized that experiencing life through the senses is just as valid, and perhaps in many ways a better way of coming to understand the world than dry intellectualism. And I would agree with that. Through my interest in gardening, through the environment, and through my study of Druidism, I've come to that conclusion. Yeah, as I was saying, Narcissus has spent his life being an intellectual, and realized actually at the end of his friendship with Goldman that Goldman's way of understanding the world was just as valid, a totally different way, like two opposites, one coming from the arts and the other one coming from science and intellectualism, and somehow the two meet in the middle and come to an understanding of what life is about. And that's actually a very powerful book, I found. Even though it's basically based in Christianity, the ideas go far beyond that, very much in the realms of Gnosticism. One of which really is the idea of finding your own path. And that's one of the things that attracted me to Druidism, and that it's very much about finding your own journey, your own sense of connection. So I thought that was a very powerful thing to read for myself. When I read that book not that long ago, I thought, yeah, that particular passage really conveys an awful lot of how I feel myself. So, going back to what we were talking about earlier, real world actions. So, you're coming from a point of view, in my case, I'm very interested in the Celtic model. I'm very interested in the environment. So, where does that lead you? Where does that manifest in terms of real world actions? So I kind of made a sort of basic list of what I thought were important things. If you really care about the environment, if you really care about making a change in the world from a spiritual perspective, I thought, well, number one thing for me is planting trees. Trees and other plants, but trees in particular have a very vital role in producing oxygen, in retaining water supply, and also retaining soil. You take all the trees out when there's heavy rain, the water gets washed down into the sea and pollutes the sea, and you've lost your topsoil and everything's disastrous. You end up with a desert eventually. So there's so many functions that trees have. I won't go into it here, but they are probably one of the most vital organisms on this planet, along with other plants. The other most vital plant, well, probably is phytoplankton, which is produces more oxygen than actually trees do. So without the phytoplankton, without the trees, we'd all be gasping for breath. In fact, we'd all be dead. So they're extremely important plants. Another thing, apart from planting these oxygen-producing organisms that we call trees and plants, I got involved in activism. I'm not saying everyone should do that, but I made a choice to get involved in Greenpeace, to get involved in XR, Extinction Rebellion, and I've also been involved in teaching. I was lucky enough to have a really good teacher for horticulture, and so over the years I've done a very simple grow your own fruit and vegetable course based on organic methods. You know, as much as possible, I don't like to support the likes of Monsanto or Bayer. I don't like to be killing the bees or causing more trouble. I want to be causing less trouble. So I very much believe in organic methods. So I mean, those are 3 areas you might want to get involved in. Something like if you could support Greenpeace, which doesn't require you to get involved in activism, but you can do. XR is very much something that's active. If you're going to do XR, Extinction Rebellion activities, that does tend to involve protesting and, you know, actual events going out into the world. And if you have an opportunity to teach other people, then, well, that's fantastic. There's nothing better than there to pass on your knowledge to somebody else who can use it, I think. And another thing I think is important is reskilling. We're in very uncertain times at the moment, and skills like gardening, obviously that's one of my passions, but learning how to look after plants, how to grow your own food, that's really important. If there's, say, I don't know, the big supermarkets all cease to exist and there's no greengrocers, what are you going to do? If you know how to garden, you know how to grow things, you can survive. I'm not saying it's going to come down to the apocalypse, but you know, it's a wonderful skill to have anyway, even if it doesn't come down to survival. Cooking, I think, is really important. We move more and more away from real food into horrible processed junk. If you learn how to cook, you can cook from basic ingredients, you can cook healthily, you can affect your health so much through your diet. So, I mean, if you eat rubbish, you're going to end up with poor health. That's just basically a fact. If you eat well, you're probably going to be a lot more healthy. And knowing how to prepare and cook food is really a major step in that process of being more healthy. Also making things, like learning how to, say, for instance, make baskets. That can be a very useful tool. Learning how to fashion tools as well, that can be very useful. Other things like herbalism. If you understand plants and what they're used for, that's a very valuable skill for your own health and the health of others. That's something that's common to both Druidism and to paganism, witchcraft on a larger scale, and, you know, religions throughout the world. There are traditions attached to knowledge of herbs and how to use them. Certainly a very, very good thing to get into. And I would say next, that's really just get your hands dirty. Actually do something. Go out and put your hands in the dirt. If you don't know stuff, you can still learn by experience. Go out and find plants. You can get books, you can get guides on the internet. Go out and actually do something in the real physical world that involves touching and feeling and actually interacting with 3-dimensional real organisms. And moving on from that point, obviously, is getting away from a computer, getting away from your telephone. You know, if you look at 1,000 pictures on the internet of what a sunset looks like, and you see a film of the sunset, and you hear people talking about it on Facebook or writing messages about it and planting memes about how wonderful the sunset is, that is not the same thing as actually getting out of your door, walking down to the beach or top of a hill and watching the sun setting. Now, a simple example, we all know what the sunset is like. We've all probably seen one, but I'm sure there must be some people who may have never actually seen the sunset, and experiencing that in the real world instead of the virtual world is completely and utterly different. And I mean, computers are wonderful tools, phones, tablets, etc. They're wonderful tools, but I would say they're no substitute whatsoever for actually interacting with the real physical world around us. Another thing came to mind was this expression, be the change, which I've seen a lot recently. I mean, there's a lot of call for change on a spiritual, economic, political level, and certainly environmentally. I would say that's a very good phrase. You know, if you want to make a difference, you want to make sure that your life makes a difference. So what you're doing with your life is actually contributing to things changing. I mean, it's going back to what I said earlier. It's very easy just to talk about stuff. It's very easy just to be on the computer and go, oh, look at this, look at that. Oh, wouldn't this be great if, you know, actually getting off of your bum and going and doing something. That is being the change. I'm not saying that there's the writing something or talking to people is of no value. Of course it is. But beyond communication, there's actually doing it, actually doing something that's practical and real and tangible. So I would say, you know, if you want to make a difference, being an ambassador by your own example is a good way to sell stuff. Being enthusiastic as well. Enthusiasm is contagious. People like enthusiasm. And, you know, if you set a good example by your own life, then you're kind of an automatic ambassador for environmentalism, a better way of life, a better way of being. If people can see that in your own life, then you don't really have to convince them too much, say too much. They can just see from your life that you know it's working, that you're doing something, that you're hopefully contented and happy, and you feel motivated, feel like you're doing something worthwhile. That's certainly how I feel about it. That by doing things that I think make a difference, I feel like I'm contributing, like I am actually doing something to make the world better. It may only be a very tiny little thing in the greater scheme of things, but at least it's my thing. I've done something, you know, and I hopefully continue to do more and more as my life progresses. You know, finally, I was thinking about matching your spiritual beliefs with your actions in this world, because that's really what underpins a lot of what I'm saying. I think it's about having this set of beliefs here, and then, you know, you let a set of actions over there, and there's this big distance between the two. That's not a good thing, I think, you know. Your actions should reflect your spiritual beliefs as much as possible, otherwise kind of the spiritual beliefs aren't really that real, I'd say. If your lifestyle doesn't fit at all with what you say you profess to believe in, that's